We now come to the backbench debate on the 10th anniversary of the Modern Slavery Act 2015. I call Dame Karen Bradley to move. Dame Karen Bradley.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. In its honour to open this debate, I beg to move that this House has considered the 10th anniversary of the Modern Slavery Act 2015. I want to thank the Backbench Business Committee for granting this debate, and also for all those honourable and right honourable members and friends who supported the application. And I also want to put on record my thanks and gratitude to the many parliamentarians and former parliamentarians who got us to the point where we were able to have a Modern Slavery Act 2015. First and foremost of those, the noble Baroness May, without whose leadership we simply would not have achieved what we did. But she did this on the back of support from so many parliamentarians that had gone before her. Starting, of course, with Anthony Steen, who, as Special Advisor to the Pre-Legislative Scrutiny Committee and the Home Affairs Committee, and the driving force behind the Human Trafficking Foundation, has been ever and omnipresent in this field. He was very ably supported by Peter Bone, who set up the first all-party parliamentary group for human trafficking and modern slavery, which I am now very proud to co-chair, together with the noble Baroness Butler-Sloss, again a true legend in this area. And we also pay tribute to Frank Field, who was a wonderful advocate for this and who I worked with so incredibly closely, both as a minister and then when I came to the backbenches again. He was somebody who led, in fact, parliamentary efforts, because he was the first chair of the Speaker's Advisory Committee on the Modern Slavery Act and how we implement it here in Parliament. In addition, can I pay tribute to the noble Lord Randall, who supported Anthony Steen and others and now chairs the Human Trafficking Foundation, and Maria Miller, who worked on the review of the Modern Slavery Act along with the Baroness Butler-Sloss and Frank Field. The Lord Coker, who chaired the Select Committee before me, and my right honourable friend from Chigwell, who was also through the social justice, through his social justice work, was a real advocate for this work. And the final person I want to pay tribute to, who is so sadly no longer with us, is James Brokenshire, who was my predecessor as Modern Slavery Minister and who really did start the work to get us to the point where we had a Modern Slavery Act. Now, I can't quite believe it's 10 years ago, and I think I might be the only person in the chamber who was here at that time. But the 26th of March 2015, which was 10 years ago to the day, it was a Thursday, was the very last day before Parliament prorogued for the 2015 election. We had been working on the Modern Slavery Act, which had gone through every proper sense of scrutiny that an act should do. It was a real exemplar of how legislation should be done. It had had pre-legislative scrutiny, there was a draft act, there was work that was done with the Select Committee and others, and it had it was really something that had cross-party support. But there were, as in always the case with any piece of legislation, any comprehensive piece of legislation, there were areas where changes were looked at. And there was quite a lot of ping-pong between this place and the other place. And I spent far more time in the other place as the Minister than I ever expected to, standing at the bar and hoping that by being there I could convince their lordships to support the government's position. But we had two real sticking points. One was on the treatment of those in the United Kingdom who were on an overseas domestic worker visa, and the other real sticking point was the issue of whether every child victim should have an independent child trafficking advocate. And with great negotiation, and I do want to pay tribute to the noble Lord Bates, who was the Lord Minister at that time, and his powers of diplomacy and skill in navigating the other place are legendary. He got us to the point where we were the very final piece of legislation to get royal assent of that Parliament. And I remember being in Marsham Street in one of the offices, and we all sat with bated breath, because although we knew that we'd got through it, nobody quite believed it until it was finally announced and the Donna Loren happened and the Modern Slavery Act 2015 became an Act of Parliament. And I'd also, as well as all those parliamentarians, I do want to pay tribute to all of the officials in the Home Office who worked so hard on this, and it was a real mission for them, and it would not have been possible without it being an incredible team effort. So thank you to everybody who got us there. Now, it's still unbelievable to me that 10 years on, I'm still asked the question, what is modern slavery? And I sometimes feel slightly cross that we're having to explain this still, but I think it is important that we do keep reflecting what this is. And it is slavery. It is very plain and simple. We all understand what slavery is. It is slavery happening today. And it is a financial crime. It is invariably for financial gain. It is the exploitation of one human being by another human being for financial gain. It is a coercive crime, and it is something that is happening globally. Estimated to be 50 million victims globally, and estimated to be over 100,000 victims here in the UK. And I can assure you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I hate to say this, but it will be happening in your towns and your villages and your cities. It'll be round the corner. There will be people you will come across in your everyday life. And I just urge everybody listening and everybody who is here because they care about this, and I'm grateful to all of you, to just educate wherever we can. One of my proudest things actually is the posters that I'm afraid many of the members here, because they're male, may not see. But if as a woman you go into the toilets in an airport or a station, there may well be a poster that says, "Are you a victim of slavery?" And that was something that we came up with in the Home Office, because we realised that if you were a victim of slavery and you were with the perpetrator, and you were in the queue at the immigration line at the airport, there was nowhere for you to go to get help, apart from the ladies' lavatory, where your perpetrator would not be following you in there, because, and the Minister will know this as well, the perpetrators are very, very, very often male, although, as we heard on our session that we held on Tuesday in the Home Affairs Select Committee, there is always at least one woman on every indictment. Women are perpetrators as well. But we needed to find somewhere we could get those women to have the support they need. So it's a crime that's happening everywhere. I have to make the point, it is not a migration crime. And there's a laziness around the language around trafficking, particularly media commentators who talk about human trafficking when they mean people smuggling. People smuggling is a consensual crime. Those that are victims of a crime, but there's victims of being almost a fraud, rather than being coerced into doing something against their will. And the analogy I would give is, it is very much like the difference between someone who gets sick from taking drugs that have been put in their drink after the drink has been spiked against their knowledge, as opposed to somebody who has gone and bought illegal drugs and taken them and is sick. There is a policy response to each of those cases, but the policy response has to be different. And so the policy response for victims of trafficking cannot be confused with the policy response for those that are victims of the crime of people smuggling. It is a crime, it is something that we need to tackle, and it's absolutely right that governments control their borders, but must separate the two out. And that should be done. Law enforcement need to separate the two out. It needs to be done at the Home Office and at other policy departments. These two issues cannot be confused. So what did the Act do? And I have got a copy of the Act. It's the first time I've actually looked through the Act for quite some time. And it's a little bit of me getting goosebumps and a little bit of me feeling slightly nauseous at what we went through to get there. But I am incredibly proud of it. It introduced the new offences of trafficking and exploitation, and can I pay tribute here to Caroline Hawley-Casey, who came in before the committee on Tuesday and also helped to write those offences. The offences were very carefully drafted to ensure we could get the maximum number of prosecutions. They were written with the view to juries being able to understand them. And I know there is a push at the moment to try and include to change the trafficking definition to not include movement. The reason that we have an exploitation offence and a trafficking offence is that a jury will think of trafficking involving movement, and that's why the exploitation offence that doesn't involve movement was there, so that prosecutors can get successful prosecutions. So I'm not sure that that change is necessary. There are additional protection for victims. And I should say, of course, that the offences carry life imprisonment, which is a really important move. The maximum sentence previously was 14 years. It's now life imprisonment. Protections for victims were improved. We put in a statutory defence, which is an incredibly important thing to ensure that victims are prepared to come forward. Civil protection orders were introduced. There were measures to enable law enforcement to more easily access the financial assets of perpetrators, including reparation orders, because the only way we're going to break this crime is actually to break the business model. There were new duties on public agencies. It introduced the Independent Anti-Slavery Commissioner. Independent child trafficking advocates are included, although they took a long time to get them there. And the other piece of very landmark legislation that was, regulation that was included in there was the Transparency in Supply Chains Measure, Section 54, which was not in the first bill, was not when I stood at that dispatch box and and closed the second reading debate, but it was introduced during the passage of the bill because it was the thing that actually everybody wanted to see included. But it's also important to say it wasn't a standalone measure. It was part of a strategy, a modern slavery strategy that had been published the year before and was based on the 4 Ps approach to tackling crime of pursue, prevent, protect and prepare. And actually, there was so much in the modern slavery strategy beyond what was in the legislation. The legislation was landmark, but it was only a very small part of what was being done. Now, at the time that the Modern Slavery Act was enacted, it was world leading. We were the first country to have a consolidated Modern Slavery Act, the first country to have transparency and supply chain legislation, and the first country that actually had this as a priority for government. But the world moves on. And I'm afraid, as we all know, criminals always move more quickly than the legislation. So, when we brought the legislation in, county lines wasn't a phenomenon. And whilst the offences in the Act are very appropriate for victims of county line and the perpetrators of county lines offences, the protections for victims and some of the other measures simply do not fit for the crimes that are perpetrated in county lines. The phenomenon of small boats was not a phenomenon. It simply wasn't there when we brought the Act in. And I do want to be clear, there is, and we've tested this on the Home Affairs Select Committee and with others, there's very little evidence that the people travelling on the small boats are victims of trafficking. They are victims of the crime of people smuggling. But the problem with small boats is that the measures that are taken to stop the small boats have a chilling effect on those that are genuine victims of the coercive crime of human trafficking. And that can mean that they don't come forward, they don't allow themselves to give the evidence that's needed to stop the perpetrators, and actually we are making the crime harder to detect and to give the protection to victims. It's a real opportunity for traffickers. So somebody may travel have paid the people, smugglers, to travel over, but then they get to the UK, they can't legitimately work, they can't find the support they need, they're in debt, and that indebtedness and the lack of being able to work legally means that they then become victims of traffickers. So, as I say, that was not a phenomenon we knew. Orphanage trafficking is another issue that is a global issue that we're only just really getting to terms with in the United Kingdom, because it's not an issue that we feel has affected us, but actually over 5 million children are currently living in orphanages who are not orphans. They are living in orphanages that have been set up to raise money, to have tourists visiting them, to have gap year students going and working there. So financial gain of those that have set up these orphanages, which are simply not orphanages. Now, Australia has led the way, and I want to pay tribute to Senator Linda Reynolds, who is standing down from the Australian Parliament in the next few days, but she's been a real leader on this, and at the Interparliamentary Union she has passed resolutions and they've been adopted, and I do hope that the Minister will look favourably on amendments that I might bring forward to Crime and Policing Bill, or maybe other bills, or possibly even a private member's bill that tries to get the issue of orphanage trafficking into our legislation, because these are the people who want to support the orphanages are doing so with the best of intentions. They want to help the poor children, but they are actually it's a fraud. These children are not orphans, and as I say, it's over 5 million children in Southeast Asia, in South America, in Africa, who are have been taken away from their families, and they are being used to raise money for fake organisations. And also on supply chains. When we brought in the Section 54 Transparency on Supply Chains measure, it was the first one of its kind that a country had done. California had it, but it was the first time a national government had introduced it. And it was a very light touch piece of regulation. Quite deliberately, this was something that we had to prove would work and was effective. But the time has come for it to be tightened. And I am disappointed that on Tuesday we couldn't get the amendment through on the use of Uyghur labour in the supply chain for solar panels, etc. The US, of course, have got the Uyghur Forced Labour Prevention Act 2021, and they have their hot goods provisions. This means that items cannot even enter the US market unless the importer can prove that there was no slavery in the supply chain. I would urge the government to look at what we can do on those measures, because I do think these are simple wins that the government could have that would really improve the situation and make it clear that we do not stand for slavery. We're not going to become green in our energy production on the backs of the poorest and those that are being exploited. So what am I looking to the Minister to answer today? So the first is, when will be a new strategy? We desperately need a new modern slavery strategy. The last one is 11 years old and we desperately need it. Will she commit to strengthening supply chain measures? It has been a very big disappointment to me that in many, many Queen's and King's speeches there have been promises of new modern slavery legislation on supply chains that have never come forward. So will she commit to that? The Fair Work Agency, which is in the new Employment Rights Bill, is something that I have concern about, because it takes the Gangmasters Licensing and Abuse Authority and puts it into a new agency that will not sit underneath the Home Office. And it is really vital that the work that the old Gangmasters Licensing Authority and then the GLAA, which is really, really important work and was brought in with absolutely the right reasons. We'll all remember the Morecambe Bay cocklepickers disaster. We need to make sure that there is proper Home Office oversight of that agency and that it focuses on abuse and exploitation, not just on making sure that employment rights are met. Protection for victims, I urge the Minister, we cannot continue with two classes of victims as we have at the moment. We need to make sure that everybody who is a victim of modern slavery can access the support they need. And could the Minister look to review the national referral mechanism? I do welcome the extra caseworkers, but 831 days on average for a decision is not good enough. She knows that, I know that. So I urge her to do whatever she can to make sure, and I will support her every step of the way to make it clear that the national referral mechanism needs to get those decisions made more quickly. We heard great evidence about this on Tuesday in the Select Committee when we met, and as I say, I will support her every step of the way. So to conclude, the UK has a duty here. We have a duty to put victims front and centre of everything we do in response to this crime. If we do not make the victim the heart of our policy response and the heart of everything we do, we will simply fail to address this issue. But we also need to lead the global efforts. We did lead the global efforts, and the time has come for us to get back there. We are looked at. People are desperate for the UK to lead on this. They know what we've done in the past, and they absolutely desperately want us to do it again. And that means working in multilateral organisations like the United Nations, where the Sustainable Development Goal 8.7 is in particular something that we need to make sure is enacted around the world. And finally, can I ask the Minister to make this one of those priorities again? I know the government has its missions. I'm sure I could squeeze it into Safer Streets or something like that. There'd be a way I could find to shoehorn this in. But without that support from and leadership from the very, very top, this matter will not get the not get the urgency it needs to be looked at in the way it needs to. It is actually the biggest human rights abuse globally. It is happening everywhere, including in the UK, and let's be clear, the highest number of victims in the NRM are UK nationals. It is not a migration crime, and we need to make sure that it has the support and the thrust behind it from that leadership that I know the Minister can give us, but I urge her to make sure the whole of government does. Thank you.
I will be also joining the member for Staffordshire Moorlands in paying close attention to the Minister's response as the only female MP to be sanctioned by the Chinese Communist Party for highlighting Uyghur slave labour in supply chains. The question is as on the order paper, and I now call, forgive me, I can't even see my list, I now call Blair McDougall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I congratulate the Right Honourable Lady from Staffordshire Moorlands for securing the debate. Although I don't thank her for that familiar feeling of dread I'm discovering you often get in this place where the Speaker immediately before you made almost identical points to those that you wish to intend to make. So perhaps my speech gets a little bit shorter, Madam Deputy Speaker. I draw the House to the Register of Interest, and my position is the chair of the APPG. On Uyghurs. We're having this debate towards the end of the holy month of Ramadan, and across the Uyghur region, Uyghurs will be imprisoned for observing the fast. When they are imprisoned, they'll be forced to eat, often to eat pork. They'll be forced to drink alcohol. And where they once might have gathered for iftar in mosques, they'll find those holy places are now piles of rubble. I've lost count of the number of times I've spoken about these crimes against humanity that are taking place in the Uyghur region in this House. But the Right Honourable Lady made a really important point, that those crimes against humanity exist alongside a framework of financial crime. Uyghurs suffer because the suffering of Uyghurs is profitable. Of course, there's an ideological element to it, there's a religious element to it, but it makes the Chinese regime a lot of money. And so when we see the women being sterilised and raped, when we see the children being stolen, the millions of people in labour camps, we can never separate that from the mass slave labour which is going on there. And earlier this week in this chamber, we were discussing the role of Uyghur slave labour within the green energy sector. And I think it's really, really important that we note that it's far from limited to that sector. We spoke a lot in this chamber earlier in the week about the proportion of solar raw materials that are infected by Uyghur slave labour. It's also true of electric vehicles. It's true of cotton. We all remember the remarkable scenes at the Select Committee recently where Sheen were simply unable to give convincing answers about whether their products contained slave labour from the Uyghur region. And increasingly it's also clear that the agricultural sector is exposed to this, particularly tomatoes and peppers. We see companies, household names like Kraft Heinz, Nestle, L'Oreal, implicated in the use of agricultural products from Xinjiang, which we believe have been made with forced labour. And this week's debate around solar energy and slave labour had a sense of déjà vu for many of us who've been working on the issue of Uyghur slave labour for a long time. We can also look back under the last government to the Health and Social Care Bill, where the government was also under similar pressure. And we're going to continue to have that debate every time issues of public procurement are raised in this House until we fix our modern slavery legislation. As the Right Honourable Lady was talking about the legislation, I was thinking that the legislation is sort of similar to me. 10 years ago, it was fresh and a thing of beauty, maybe, but now it's maybe tired and showing its age. And we have to find a way to. Thank you for the no-no-nos from the House there. That was reassuring. But we have to update the modern slavery legislation, not least because much of the rest of the world, ironically inspired by what we did 10 years ago, have moved to update their protections against slave labour goods. Right Honourable Lady mentioned in the United States the Uyghur Forced Labour Act and then the due diligence directive in the EU and the forced labour regulations there. But with regards to goods that are effective of forced labour coming into the UK, the Modern Slavery Act is simply not designed for that. The Right Honourable Lady spoke about the things that have changed in the last decade. Few of us would have imagined that the level of sort of industrial slavery, millions of people involved in it, something that is a sort of relic of the 19th or early 20th century, would have become so prevalent in the experience of Uyghur Muslims. And also to envisage how difficult it would become in Xinjiang to do any sort of due diligence at all, which I think is why so many of us are led to the argument that you have to have a presumption that goods from that part of the world do contain modern slavery. But we know the Modern Slavery Act is not working because of the Uyghurs. Every day, almost every day, a cargo flight will arrive into this country from Urumqi, the ground zero of slave labour for Uyghurs. And looking to sort of specifics within the Act, I know that Section 54 of the Act requires that companies with a turnover of over 36 million should produce a statement on slave labour. But I think looking back at the last 10 years, the lack of any sort of penalty for companies that don't do that was one of its major failings, with about 1 in 10, I think, companies just choosing not to do it without any consequence. And I want to also talk about the issue of justice. We know that the workers who are exploited in places like Xinjiang are not going to find justice in their own jurisdictions. But under the Modern Slavery Act, they also can't get that justice here. And I think it's time that we say that if a company operates in the UK and is implicated in such human rights abuses within its supply chain, there should be an opening for the victims of that to seek justice in the courts in the UK. Those who have tried to do that in other cases, and some of them are alive, so I won't, Madam Deputy Speaker, raise them. It's taken them years and real legal struggle to get the case heard, and it needs to be easier if it's going to be an incentive for companies, or rather a disincentive for companies, to do the wrong thing. And while talking about the behaviour of companies that operate within the UK, I do have to say, I think after the behaviour, the spectacle of the evidence that was given by Sheen to the committee within this place, I think it would be unthinkable if we were to allow them to register in the stock exchange here, because it would send a signal that this is an economy which is willing to be based on the competitive advantage that comes from not paying workers. I also, on the subject of justice, I want to mention the organisation Hope for Justice, and particularly my constituent Ewan Fraser, who's been a source of real help and advice to me since I was elected. He makes the point to me that it's back in 2018, I think the government did its last study of the economic and social impact of modern slavery within the UK. Back then it was costed at £4.3 billion, but I wonder if the Minister might be able to refresh that and give us a new insight into that. But I also wonder whether she might be willing to meet with Hope for Justice to discuss their proposals for independent modern slavery advocates, individuals who can work with survivors, ensure they have the legal rights and entitlements that they have are actually realised, not just on things like getting justice on slavery, but also housing, immigration, and also importantly on compensation, again, so that there is more of a disincentive for companies to do that. As the Right Honourable Lady said just in conclusion, we are trying to rebuild the British economy, but we cannot do that at the cost of being complicit in the destruction of an entire people. And it's in this 10th anniversary high time to modernise the Modern Slavery Act.
Paul Kohler.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Right Honourable Member for Staffordshire Moorlands for securing this important debate. As members, we are all united by a desire to do as much as we can to tackle the scourge of modern slavery. My constituency, Wimbledon, is known for many things, but perhaps less well known for its connection to one of the greatest battles for human dignity, the abolition of slavery. Over 200 years ago, William Wilberforce, a champion for the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade, lived in Wimbledon. Just as Wilberforce rejected inhumanity in his time, we must renew our commitment to eradicating this injustice in ours. And though his efforts were huge, we stand here on the 10th anniversary of the Modern Slavery Act, aware that the fight is far from over. Whether in the form of human trafficking, criminal, forced or sexual labour, or domestic servitude, modern slavery pervades our society, treating people as commodities for criminal gain. The introduction of the Modern Slavery Act in 2015 was a watershed moment, hailed as innovative and world-leading, echoing the UK's leadership in abolishing the transatlantic slave trade in the 19th century. It was designed to protect victims, prosecute offenders and prevent exploitation at its roots. Of the nearly 50 million people around the world estimated to be trapped in modern slavery, some 120,000 are thought to be resident in the UK. In 2024, over 19,000 potential victims of modern slavery were referred to the Home Office through the National Referral Mechanism, a 30% increase from the previous year. Horrifyingly, 31% of all referrals last year were children. The Act introduced several key measures, including Section 42, to establish the role of the Independent Anti-Slavery Commissioner, to encourage best practice in the prevention, detection, investigation and prosecution of modern slavery and to support victims. However, for a staggering 18 months between 2022 and 23, whilst we had 3 Conservative Prime Ministers, we had no anti-slavery commissioner. During this time, engagement between the Modern Slavery Unit and key NGOs declined. The government's ministerial strategy groups, once critical to tackling modern slavery, were disbanded. It is for this reason that the Lib Dems advocate for Parliament to have the power to appoint an independent anti-slavery commissioner should the post remain unfulfilled for 3 months. But we need to do more than simply ensure the role is not left vacant. Challenges still persist in the effectiveness of the Independent Anti-Slavery Commissioner due to inadequate resources and limited capacity. Despite the current Commissioner's efforts since, and I quote, inheriting a dormant office, the department remains underfunded and under-resourced. Without appropriate funding and resources, the Commissioner's ability to fulfil its legal obligations is quite clearly compromised. The Modern Slavery Act was praised for introducing provisions aimed at greater transparency in supply chains, with the goal of protecting workers and compelling large commercial organisations to eliminate modern slavery from their operations. Section 54 requires companies with a turnover of 36 million or more, supplying goods or services and operating in the UK, to introduce an annual slavery and human trafficking statement. Although welcomed, Section 54 only mandates businesses to report on their efforts to address forced labour in supply chains. It does not require them to act. In fact, simply reporting no action seems to be all they need to do to comply with the Act. Whilst, despite the Secretary of State's authority to seek injunctions on non-compliant organisations, none have been issued. In 2022, 29% of eligible organisations failed to submit a modern slavery statement. Additionally, the number of statements recorded the following year dropped by almost 50%, indicating that businesses are deprioritising compliance. And whilst previous governments have expressed their intentions to strengthen Section 54 by introducing mandatory reporting requirements and specific penalties for non-compliance, no changes have been implemented to date. Too often, victims are hidden in plain sight. It's sobering to think many of us may have encountered them without even realising it. Recently, for example, the care sector has become a focal point for modern slavery. The inclusion of care workers and home carers on the shortage occupation list made them eligible for the health and care visa. From 2022 to 23, the number of health and care visas granted skyrocketed, reflecting the sector's increased reliance on foreign workers. But alongside that growth came a disturbing increase in exploitation, with over 600% more care sector modern slavery cases reported. Evidence given to the Modern Slavery Act Committee last year reported, by the end of 2023, an alarming 21% of the 1,300 NHS suppliers were identified as being at high risk of modern slavery. The types of exploitation vary, but one common theme is the charging of illegal recruitment fees. Victims are often forced to pay as much as £30,000 for visa applications and supposed training courses, amounts so large that workers often have no choice but to stay trapped in abusive conditions. The care sector continues to grapple with systemic issues such as low pay and poor working conditions, exacerbated by fragmented regulatory oversight, spread across agencies like the Care Quality Commission and the Employment Agency Standards Inspectorate. This lack of coordination hampers effective enforcement. The Gang Masters and Labour Abuse Authority holds modern slavery investigation powers in England and Wales and receives referrals from the CQC, but its remit does not specifically cover the care sector. Despite prioritising the sector, the Gang Masters and Labour Abuse Authority struggles with insufficient funding and a low inspector-to-worker ratio, falling below international standards. As a result, proactive inspections are rare, whilst many workers fear reporting exploitation due to potential reprisals. The former Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe, Special Representative's 2022 report highlighted the Gang Masters and Labour Abuse Authority's effectiveness in preventing and investigating labour exploitation and protecting vulnerable workers, but stressed the need for greater financial support to fully realise its capacity. Whilst the Liberal Democrats have consistently called for a powerful new worker protection enforcement authority to safeguard those in precarious work through intelligence-led enforcement and a firewall that separates labour standards enforcement from border control. The UK's current immigration system exacerbates the vulnerabilities of migrant workers. The previous Home Affairs Select Committee described a deprioritisation of human trafficking in favour of attention and irregular migration under the previous government's policies. And I warmly acknowledge the fact the current Border Security, Asylum and Immigration Bill seeks to repeal much of the Illegal Migration Act's provisions on modern slavery. In concluding, I would like to return to where I began. Today we inherit not only Wilberforce's legacy, but also his responsibility. Modern slavery may adopt new forms, but its cruelty remains the same. It thrives in the shadows of all our communities, the exploitation of the vulnerable and the complacency of indifference. Let us pledge not only to celebrate how far we have come, but to redouble our efforts as there is still far to go. For in remembering Wilberforce's endeavours, we must find the courage to shape a future in which his campaign to entirely abolish slavery finally achieves its aim. Thank you.
Tom Collins.
Speaker, as a child I was taught that 200 years ago we abolished the transatlantic slave trade. As a young adult I learnt that this had not marked the end, but that modern slavery was a booming global industry. And then, as I became a young father, I learnt through the excellent work of Hope for Justice that there were slaves right here in the UK, hidden even within my own city. And I learnt that many of those slaves were children, not unlike my own. I felt a hint of the desperation that I would feel if one of my children had been trafficked into slavery. How I would pray that there would be someone to rescue them, someone who would not rest until slaves had been found and released, and I realised that for somebody else's child, I had to be that someone. Fortunately, I was not alone. And 10 years ago, this place once again passed legislation to end slavery in our nation. It recognised our duty to eliminate slavery from our supply chains, and in policing, it introduced a key revelation, that someone presenting as a perpetrator might in reality be a victim. But the world has continued to change. Our protections have weakened and the challenge has grown. It's estimated that there are 122,000 victims of modern slavery in the UK, yet less than 20,000 were referred to the National Referral Mechanism last year. Detecting modern slavery is hard. It is a crime in which the victim is intrinsically hidden, often as invisible and elusive as the perpetrator. The policing challenge is unique. Furthermore, victims of modern slavery are often forced to break the law, or they are camouflaged amongst legitimate yet exploited workers, themselves insecure, transient and unrepresented. We are combating highly organised and effective international criminal networks, agile, opportunistic and embedded in our communities. And our system is vulnerable. It has been too easy for children to disappear. Siloed public services are too ineffective in recognising and responding to potential cases. Our systems are divided and the traffickers have conquered. Yet there is hope. We have seen that local authorities, once they're trained in what to look for, do begin to identify victims. Working together with partners, they can disrupt this crime. And with clearly defined and resourced roles, empowered to work across multiple organisations and departments, these complex crimes that intersect with multiple agencies can be detected, victims can become survivors, and perpetrators can be convicted. We need to work across government to deliver this. To eliminate slavery, we must no longer tolerate exploitation of any kind. This government has made great steps in improving workers' rights, and this must continue. We must be responsive and fast, keeping up with the highest international standards in law and human rights, and Europe's Convention on Action Against Trafficking in Human Beings provides a framework that could be adopted broadly. Similarly, we must give the requirement for businesses to audit their supply chains teeth. The Modern Slavery Act required large businesses to publish details of what action they were taking to identify and tackle exploitation in their supply chains. We now need checks and penalties for failures to effectively keep supply chains slavery-free. Like survivors of stalking, domestic and sexual abuse, survivors of modern slavery need access to independent advocacy, and this should be embedded in our national response, together with long-term holistic support. This is crucial both for survivors' recovery, but also crucially to reducing vulnerability to further harm or re-exploitation. We cannot deal with this as if it's business as usual. The world is becoming increasingly unstable and unpredictable. International conflicts and existing climate pressures are creating vulnerable people and providing perfect conditions for traffickers. It is visible in the English Channel, but this is the tip of an iceberg, and what is hidden are the tens of lives of thousands of victims who are living in the fear and despair of slavery right here in our own towns, cities and rural areas. We are taking firm and decisive action to protect our borders, break criminal gangs and clear the backlog of immigration cases. I recognise the points that the Honourable Member for Staffordshire Moorlands made about the distinction between people smuggling and human trafficking, but those sectors do overlap. And while this is a good start, and I recognise the impressive impact that the Minister and our new government has already made through our investment in an additional 200 modern slavery caseworkers. We are smashing the iceberg above the surface, but to solve this problem, we need a response that matches the scale of the hidden challenge. Modern slavery is a complex crime that cuts across all aspects of government and society, and our response must match it, cutting across the whole of government. And I would like to put it to this House, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we perhaps have a golden opportunity. This government has already committed to a fresh approach to governing, one of collaboration, partnership and agility. We are also undertaking a historic and ambitious programme of local government reorganisation and devolution of power from Westminster into our regions. And we've already seen programmes tested and proven that provide a model that we can deploy through local government. The Human Trafficking Foundation has worked with 9 local authorities that have appointed a designated modern slavery coordinator. We've seen those coordinators deploying training in local authorities, improving partnership working, increasing the quality and quantity of referrals to support, and delivering prevention strategies. The work of these modern slavery coordinators has been remarkable. I will give way.
Appreciate it, and I'm intervening on him so that I can put on the record that I am a trustee of the Human Trafficking Foundation. I realise I did not refer to that in my opening statement, and I do want to be clear that I am a trustee and I do support all the work they do.
Tom Collins.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Out of 218 local authorities that made National Referral Mechanism referrals for adults in 2023, the nine authorities with a designated modern slavery position made up 18% of all those adult referrals, and this rose to 20% in 2024. They trained thousands of local authority staff and partners, and they increased confidence rates in reporting modern slavery from around 45% to close to 99%. And critically, these measures led to prosecutions. So we can learn from this, and devolution is a ripe opportunity to deploy it. It is clear that, as government, we can no longer delegate, or to me it seems, modern slavery to a single department, but we need to build both passive and active immunity into every area. Our modern slavery response must saturate our work, both at national and local level. And alongside that collective duty, dedicated roles with cross-organisation links and clear ownership are key. A national strategy that factors in local partnership responses would be transformative. An example of this can be seen in the devolved decision-making pilots, where multi-agency teams led by a local authority made national referral mechanisms decisions for children. This approach was over 4 times faster than the Home Office in making decisions. It encouraged information sharing across agencies and partnership working on a local level to keep children safe. The success of devolved decision-making panels demonstrates the effectiveness of coordinated local efforts under a national framework. I welcome the Minister's commitment to rolling out these panels in the recently published action plan. Local authorities already have duties in disrupting modern slavery, with a clear cross-cutting partnership approach facilitated by clear dedicated local leadership. We could start to build real immunity into our communities. We've embraced the mission to deliver a decade of national renewal. A decade of the Modern Slavery Act has allowed us to begin the abolition of modern slavery. We have the tools, but we must not rest. Rather, we should recommit ourselves to the most ambitious goal of ending slavery in our nation and our supply chains. We can see what needs to be done. We have begun. Now we must deliver the collaboration, commitment, and resources to do it. There are people in our country who are utterly hidden, isolated, fearful, and hopeless. But they are not alone. Today, I urge all in this House to recommit with me, not to rest, but to forge on, to do what it takes and what the evidence has taught us, to find slavery out, to prosecute the perpetrators, to break the networks, to march on until every person is seen and slavery is finished.
Ellie Chowns.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I warmly welcome the fact that we're having this debate today. I thank the Honourable Member for Staffordshire Moorlands for securing it and opening it, and indeed for her work on this topic. And as we have heard from members from all sides already today, there is something to celebrate in the fact that the legislation is here. There is still much more work to be done to achieve that goal of eliminating slavery entirely. And so I'd like to take this opportunity to raise 2 particular issues with the Minister, areas where I feel that there is work to be done that could strengthen our modern slavery actions and policies. So the first issue is in relation to essentially checks and balances, review processes. For any administrative decision-making process, it's really important that there is an opportunity for that decision to be reviewed by people with expertise. And yet, in December 2022, the then Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, disbanded the multi-agency assurance panels that played a crucial role, bringing together people with expertise, policy and operational expertise in tackling modern slavery, to review cases in which applicants had been rejected in order to ensure that those cases were actually sound. And I was shocked, actually surprised to read in the briefing that perhaps members all across the House have had from a coalition of dozens of organisations working on modern slavery, to read that 70% of reconsidered negative decisions were overturned. So there's clearly an issue here around the decision-making process, and clearly a vital role for review mechanisms such as the multi-agency assurance panels in checking that those decisions are sound. So I'd very much welcome the Minister responding on this particular point in her summing up, and perhaps saying whether the government will consider reinstating those important panels. The second point that I'd like to raise is in relation to temporary work visas and the vulnerability that creates for those on those visas to potential labour exploitation, because the key is to prevent labour exploitation in the first place. This relates particularly to people who are on overseas domestic worker visas, but also, as the Honourable Member said, in the care sector, that's been a growing sector, and indeed agricultural seasonal workers, those 3 sectors in particular. And the core of this problem, it seems to me, is that when the temporary work visa is attached to the employer, there is such a strong disincentive for the employee to be able to come forward, to speak out, to report if there is labour exploitation, because they will suffer the punishment for doing so. And so that means that these problems remain hidden. It makes it so much more difficult for people to come forward. And I think there are some very sensible reforms that have been proposed by those working in the sector concerned with this area that could tackle that. The first is that if these work visas were renewable, so long as the employment continued, you would have a degree of security for the individual. But that also has to go alongside a provision under which if the employer is subject to an enforcement mechanism for exploitation, that the employee is able to remain here and, in fact, provided with the opportunity to seek alternative employment, an alternative sponsor for their visa. And I understand that this is being done in Australia now. They have a mechanism whereby bridging visas are provided so that there is a measure of justice in the system for those who are subjected to exploitation to be able to escape that and find new employment with a non-exploitative employer. So those are the two issues I'd particularly like to bring to the Minister's attention, and I very much look forward to hearing her response. Thank you.
Sarah Russell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you to the Right Honourable Member for Staffordshire Moorland for bringing this debate. I know she is a great champion of these issues. So the Global Slavery Index estimates that 122,000 people are living in conditions of slavery in the UK, and 19,000, in excess of 19,000 victims were referred to the National Referral Mechanism in the last year alone. My constituency of Congleton is in an absolutely beautiful area, and most of it has a very low crime rate by national standards. But this problem is so widespread that it will be occurring in my constituency because it's occurring everywhere. And 122,000 people is roughly 1.5 times the number of people in my constituency. It is a really significant number of people. We often talk about violence against women and girls in this chamber, and it is very important, and I will talk about it in this context. But actually, of those who were referred to the National Referral Mechanism last year, 72% were men. The most common nationality referred were UK nationals. Children constituted 31% of referrals, of whom 48% were for criminal exploitation. And again, 78% of those referred were boys. It is absolutely crucial that we keep up the pressure to remove and reduce violence against women and girls, but it is absolutely critical that we also are aware of how much violence there still is in society for boys and men. There are lots and lots of different ways in which modern slavery occurs in the UK, and it is the diversity of it which I think in many ways makes it more difficult to tackle. Often, the way it occurs for men is in the agricultural sector, it's in the building sector, it's also in takeaways. The absolute growth in the takeaway sector in the UK means that there are large numbers of takeaways operating from warehouses in which the workers are simply completely unseen. Many of them are earning incredibly little. If in your local area you are able to order a takeaway for less money than it would cost you to cook it yourself at home, chances are that's how it's come about.
Will the Honourable Lady give way on that point?
I will give way.
Thanks very much to the Honourable Lady for giving way. She's making a really important point about industries like takeaways being sites of modern slavery. In my local council in East Lothian, there's been a pilot looking specifically at the takeaway industry and what regulations local authorities can put in place that would allow them to enter premises and see what kind of modern slavery is taking place in there. And I just think it's a very interesting pilot that I wanted to draw to heart and the House's attention.
Sarah Russell.
Thank you very much for drawing that to my attention. I am very interested in it. I'm pleased to report that I'd say the overwhelming majority of takeaways in my constituency remain physical premises that also operate as restaurants, but I'm very aware that that's not necessarily the case necessarily for the whole of my local authority area, and it's certainly not the case for the whole of the country. In terms of children being referred and the large numbers of boys being referred in this instance, I was really shocked when I found out about how this is happening. So often what is happening is that gang members, older gang members, are finding very vulnerable young boys, some as young as 10 or 11, and just asking them to just look after some drugs for them for a little bit. Could you just hold them for me, just very briefly? And then those gang members will arrange for that boy to be beaten up viciously, and they will then be told that they have lost the drugs, that they now owe the gang member a whole load of money, and they will then be put to work as county lines drug dealers themselves from incredibly young ages. It is an absolutely horrific means of exploiting young boys, particularly vulnerable children, and we need to be as aware of it as we are of the way that grooming gangs operate around girls. I would then move on to how this also particularly affects women and girls. And if I could say one thing, I really, really wish that men, and it is predominantly men, would stop using prostitutes. Could you just stop? Because the number of women who are being brought to the UK under false pretences, believing that they're going to do a different form of work, and are then put to sex work against their will, having had their kept in physical confined situations which they're not allowed to leave, and having had their passports taken away from them, is really, really significant. The other thing that happens is that some women who come here knowing that that might be an element of their work, if they then complain about it or want to stop, are told that their children back home will be harmed if they do. So we're unable to go to the police when they are being systematically raped. So please, please, men, stop using prostitutes. I know that Cheshire Police are taking all of these issues very seriously and doing their best, but of course the best way to stop having a market for criminal activity is for people to stop buying criminally traded goods, whether that is vapes, tobacco, drugs or women. The final element of human trafficking that I'd like to talk about today is in the care sector, and many people in this room have heard me talk about this topic before, so I don't want to overlabour it. But the GLA licensing scheme, the Gangmaster and Labour Authority licensing scheme, does not extend to the care sector. So agencies and sponsors are seizing opportunities to exploit other people for their own financial gain. There are a lot of people who receive care in my community, either paid for via the local authority and therefore ultimately the taxpayer, or paid for with people's life savings. They would be absolutely horrified if they realised the number of people doing that work who had been trafficked here in the first place. Other honourable members have mentioned various of the different organisations working in this area, but one of them is Unseen, and they talk about regularly seeing members of the care, speaking on their helpline to members of the care profession who have paid somewhere between £11,000 and £30,000 to get here when they should not be paying anything other than their own travel expenses. 4% of victims have been threatened with either direct personal harm or harm to their family members. Actual physical harm was reported in 2% of the cases that came to their helpline. Nearly half of victims described confinement or restricted movement. The list of things that has gone on is genuinely, absolutely horrendous. So I would just very much like to suggest that when we have the Fair Work Agency taking over GLA's responsibilities, that we make sure that licensing is brought into this sector, or we otherwise look at how the visa regime can be changed so that people can transfer between employers, and how we can generally stamp out the level of exploitation within the care sector. So I'd like to thank everyone who's participated in this debate. I know that there's a lot of, across the House, a lot of strong feeling that we can do a lot better, and we should be doing a lot better for vulnerable people in this country. Thank you.
Yeah. Chris Murray.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I begin by paying tribute to the Right Honourable Member for Staffordshire Moorlands for both securing this debate and her legacy in this field, and as Chair of the Home Affairs Committee, her ongoing commitment to this issue is palpable, and I look forward to working with her in the years ahead on this. It is 10 years on from the Modern Slavery Act, And while I'm not in the habit of praising the Home Office under the previous Conservative government, I'm not so nakedly partisan that I can't break that habit on this occasion, because it is true that the UK Modern Slavery Act was a world-leading act. I would also say that its Scottish counterpart, the Human Trafficking and Exploitation Scotland Act, which is also 10 years old this year, was equally groundbreaking. But while we recognise that, we also must admit that while that act took us 2 steps forward, we have undoubtedly gone 1 step back. The terms modern slavery and human trafficking strike fear into our hearts, and they capture our attention. It sounds like the stuff of a TV drama, and frequently it does involve the most horrific, vivid crimes in society and the worst of humanity. But we must not let that fool us into thinking that this only happens at the extreme or only in the big metropolitan city far from us. It happens everywhere, in every community, in every constituency. It affects, as we've heard from several honourable members today, it affects men as well as women. Its victims are children as well as adults. It affects British people as much as, indeed, more than foreign nationals. And it is labour exploitation as much as it is sexual exploitation. Yes, I'll happily give you.
Just on your point about it happening everywhere, my constituency of Carlisle is the most northerly city in England, and on the 3rd of October 2018, officers from Cumbria Police, the NCA and investigators from the Gangmasters and Labour Abuse Authority freed a man who had been kept in captivity on the outskirts of Carlisle for 40 years. He was vulnerable because of his learning disability. He had variously been kept in a horse box, in a disused caravan, and when he was found in a damp, rotten garden shed with neither heating nor lighting, the window didn't close, water poured through the door, and his makeshift bed was congealed with vomit. Does my honourable friend agree with me that someone could be kept for 40 years on the outskirts of one of England's cities should shame us all, and we should recommit ourselves to ensuring that every single person who might still be in that circumstance is found and freed in the same way that that gentleman was? Sorry.
I thank my honourable friend for making that really important point. I remember reading about that case, and it is one of the most horrific ones. But I have to say there are so many horrific cases of modern slavery on every high street in Britain. It's taking place, and we have to be completely vigilant about finding it everywhere. I want to talk a bit today about the public policy response to this appalling crime, because obviously it's a dramatic, wicked crime. We have the blandly named National Referral Mechanism as our tool. And we have to be honest, it is currently all but broken down. In the words of the Home Secretary when she came to the Home Affairs Committee before Christmas, the NRM has become, quote, kind of stuck. There are huge delays in victims getting a decision on the National Referral Mechanism. We heard evidence this week that the mean waiting time is 831 days. That is beyond unacceptable. It is systemic dysfunction. And to be clear, that is not just a number. It has a real cost. The real-world implication of that is re-trafficking. Women who are trafficked for sex, who then come to the state for help, end up back in the hands of their traffickers because of our delays. Children who are locked in houses and forced to farm cannabis in appalling conditions, who manage to escape, who come for us to help, then, because of our sheer incompetence, end up back with their torturers. We should not be congratulating ourselves today on the passage of historic legislation. We should be hanging our heads in shame at what is happening under our watch. So I hope the Minister will today set out a clear plan to clear that backlog, and also will recognise that clearing the backlog is not some huge step of progress. It's actually just getting us back to the baseline we should be at. In order to achieve that, can I draw the House's attention to the child trafficking pilot that has been running for the last 5 years? And I'm so glad my honourable friend from Worcester referenced this. I should probably declare an interest. I was involved in setting the pilot up in its Scottish iteration, but it is worth our attention because what it does is it devolves decision-making in the NRM to a panel of local stakeholders, people from social work, from education, from the police, psychologists and others who know the child's case, and it empowers them to adjudicate whether that child is a victim of trafficking or not. It has been extremely successful. Decisions are taken more quickly and they are taken with higher quality because the people who know that child's case are better placed to make a decision than an official in Whitehall. Before coming here, I worked on preventing human trafficking for 5 years, and I know that the issue is complex and difficult. But I also encountered some of the most effective public servants I've ever seen in my time, like Tara, led by Brona Andrew in Glasgow, which cares for women trafficked into Scotland for commercial sexual exploitation, and Joy Gillespie, who advocates for survivors of trafficking in Scotland. But the most impressive programme I've seen in 5 years of anti-trafficking is this pilot in Glasgow. The Minister and I have corresponded on this previously, so I strongly encourage the Government to look at rolling it out more broadly. Can I make two final points about the steps the new Government is taking on modern slavery? Firstly, on labour exploitation. The Employment Rights Bill, which is a landmark piece of legislation that I couldn't be prouder to support, scraps the Gang Masters and Labour Abuse Authority and establishes the Fair Work Agency, as many have said. That is all to the good, but the Fair Work Agency has a mammoth task, enforcing the minimum wage and employment rights across the whole workforce. Are we sure it will have the focus and resource to tackle modern slavery too? And will it have the right relationships with the police? Because that will be critical to ensure enforcement. Remember, this crime is everywhere. It's in every community. And moreover, when it is up and running, the Home Office will lose sponsorship of the GLAA and it will be subsumed into the Department of Business and Trade. Is that the right place for modern slavery responsibilities? I remember from my experience that the GLAA was significantly under-resourced. In order to inspect all of Scotland's fisheries and agriculture and farming, it had only one inspector. That clearly wasn't enough. Will we have more now? So I'd like to hear from the Government what plans they have in place to ensure modern slavery isn't deprioritised. Secondly, on the panoply of new developments that we have had as the new Government has hit the ground running, there's been some that I have been particularly pleased to see. Not just the new Fair Work Agency, but also that cuckooing will be made a specific offence, that grooming will be an aggravating factor in child sex offender prosecutions, and a new range of measures to halve violence against women and girls. I could not welcome these steps more. But is there a coherent strategy to ensure they're being fully deployed to tackle modern slavery? Are we marshalling the power of government to target these new measures at the perpetrators of these crimes? Can I ask the Minister, when can we expect to see that robust modern slavery strategy? I ask this because this issue needs ministerial grip. Without clear ministerial direction, law enforcement cannot put resources into it. Without law enforcement prioritising the resources, there are no investigations. Without investigations, there is no justice. Think of the woman who came to the British state and asked for help, only for our administrative incompetence to mean she's back in the hands of her traffickers, being pimped out to be raped every day, multiple times a day. We have failed her once already. We need a strategy to ensure we do not do it again. Will the strategy take account of new developments in modern slavery in the last 10 years? And please, the Honourable Member for Wimbledon and others mentioned the care sector and exploitation in those visas, but we're also seeing it in student visas, the EU settlement scheme and others. Will the new white paper on migration, legal migration, be fully modern slavery proofed so we don't allow new routes to open up? And I also note that the Scottish Government has finally got around to refreshing its human trafficking strategy A long overdue step, I would argue, but that is also a good opportunity to ensure we get coherence across the whole of the UK. So as we mark 10 years since the Modern Slavery Act was passed, it's clear we still have our work cut out for us. I, for one, am willing to work with anyone inside this chamber and outside it to get it done. Thank you.
Yeah.
Tom Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's an honour to follow honourable friends and honourable members, all of whom have given such powerful speeches today. Just 2 days ago, it was 218 years since William Wilberforce cajoled this Parliament into leading the way in combating slavery. The Abolition of the Slave Trade Act was passed to a standing ovation on March 25th, 1807. That Act made it illegal to trade in enslaved people across the then British Empire. 25 years later, another groundbreaking piece of legislation, the 1833 Abolition of Slavery Act, ended the use of enslaved labour. But clearly, slavery didn't stop. That's why we're talking about it today. Modern slavery is just that, it's modern. It's a modern version of the slavery we've always known. Slavery is right here, it's right now. It doesn't belong to some distant past or some faraway country. As we were just hearing, the majority of people who are referred into the National Referral Mechanism are British. They are men. They are often boys. And so we have to, as a Parliament, recommit to tackling slavery. Modern slavery, as we've just been hearing, has spread its tentacles worldwide into so many aspects of our life. It is believed that there's 50 million estimated victims of modern slavery worldwide. In our country, 122,000. That's the size of Blackpool. That's the size of Cambridge, 122,000 people. So we have to renew our leadership to tackle modern slavery. In my own constituency of Bournemouth East, there will be women working in nail bars who are enslaved. There will be men working on building sites who are enslaved. There will be mostly women working in people's homes as domestic slaves. And there will be many other types of servitude going on. The figures that are reported are the tip of the iceberg. These are people hiding in plain sight. And we need to get the message out that modern slavery is a priority of this government and a priority of this Parliament and a priority of this country. And I'm saying this because I've worked in my professional life before I became an MP in trying to support victims of modern slavery and to find victims where they are and get them to safety quickly. I was the chair of an anti-slavery network for 5 years. I led a mental health, domestic abuse and homelessness charity which had run a modern slavery service, pioneering an independent trauma advisory role that got support to around 50 victims and survivors of modern slavery. I was working alongside fantastic colleagues on a report into the nature and extent of modern slavery in Oxford, which used interesting methodology beyond the typical reporting of stats from the police force, that worked in a case-based way alongside providers of support to find that where in the 5-year period that the report looked at, there were 123 recorded modern slavery crimes in the Thames Valley area. In fact, by drawing in the voluntary sector, there were between 319 and 442 cases which were believed to be cases of modern slavery, showing that actually what we see as reported is not always the true reflection of what is happening. And our third sector organisations and our networks are so important in trying to tackle modern slavery and support victims. It's also just worth saying too that the need to tackle modern slavery really has never been greater. And while this is a decade that marks, this is an anniversary that marks the decade of the Modern Slavery Act, it is, I must also say, the case that we have seen a decade and more of austerity. And I say that because some of the people who will be enslaved will be people who have grown up under austerity, who have seen their Sure Start centres, their youth centres cut, who have seen their schools being able to provide less and less, who have seen insecure work and low pay and 0 hours contracts for their parents, who will be living in homes that have not been properly regulated, and so they have grown up with significant vulnerability. And when people grow up with such significant vulnerability, I've seen with my own eyes that they are so susceptible to enslavement. So my hope too is that with the government's agenda to bring renters reform, to bring reform of employment rights, to make sure that we've got investment in our public services, we will repair the fabric of society in our public services so that no young person has to fall victim to modern slavery. And in my own part of town, in my own part of the country, in Dorset, we've seen the number of cases reported to Dorset Police over the last 9 years going up. In 2023, it was at 65. In 2024, it was at 108. So we clearly need to take action. With your permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm going to bring the voices of modern slavery victims into this debate. I want to talk about 3 cases involving my office where we're supporting victims or have supported victims. With one case, a person was identified as a potential victim of human trafficking and was entered into the National Referral Mechanism. A colleague of mine from Edinburgh was just saying that that's quite a bland name for a bland service. He couldn't have described it better. The NRM is broken and needs serious reform. This individual's case has been given a reasonable grounds decision, but it's still awaiting a conclusive grounds decision. And no wonder when you have such long waits to get those decisions. I will happily give way.
Russell. Does my honourable friend agree with me that we need to extend the time limits for challenging not reasonable grounds decisions, because actually at the moment they've been reduced to 30 days and it's not long enough to get legal aid, a lawyer to help you, given the lack of legal aid funding?
Tom Hayes.
I think my honourable friend makes a very good point there, particularly in the short term, as the government is working so hard to get a grip on that delay. I think that could be a really helpful temporary measure. It could remove some of the anxiety that the victim will encounter, and it will remove some of the difficulties that support services around that victim will have to encounter in trying to get more support appropriate to the victims. The individual I was just talking about was promised that they would be able to work, but instead was forced to arrive on a visitor visa. After 3 months in the UK, they became homeless and experienced severe mental health issues, including depression, anxiety and suicidal thoughts, for which they're currently receiving medication. They owe a large sum of money with interest to the agent who facilitated their travel to the UK. The agent has warned them not to return home. They have claimed asylum in the UK, a life in limbo. A second case of a former constituent trafficked into the UK while pregnant for forced prostitution. She's now been recognised as a victim of modern slavery and granted asylum. And a final and third case, another female constituent who sought help with seeking accommodation following escape from an abusive marriage. She's been receiving support from the Liberty Project run by BCHA, which provides a shelter for women escaping modern slavery in my service. Why do I mention these 3 people? It's not merely because the voices deserve to be heard in this Parliament, but because all of us as MPs will have contact with victims and survivors of modern slavery. All of us know from a first-hand experience about the pressures and difficulties in our system, and we bring that into the ways in which we try to improve our system. I think that's important for our publics to know, because I don't think that often they know about the case-working aspects of what we do and how it so importantly informs what we do in bringing forward legislative change. And I mentioned the Liberty Project run by BCHA. They're a fantastic organisation working across BCP and working within my constituency of Bournemouth East, providing safe house accommodation and frontline support to potential survivors through their reflection and recovery period. And here I make a plea to the Minister. BCHA, like so many other organisations, provide trauma-informed, person-centred approaches. Having the funds for organisations to walk alongside victims who have gone through the worst experiences of their lives so that they don't have a requirement to tick boxes, but rather a requirement to sit and listen to people and work with them to recover in the ways they need to reach the point in their life that they want, whether it's work or training or education, is so critical. And I want to commend what our third sector does and ask for additional government support in propping them up. And I know that my honourable friend, my right honourable friend, is such a firm advocate for the third sector and victim support from her lifetime of working within the sector. And I want to close just by talking about the infection of goods that come into our country with slavery, picking up on a comment from my honourable friend. I think I may refer to him now as the fresh and beautiful honourable member, as he so self-described himself. I think Madam Deputy Speaker wasn't in the chair for that particular reflection, which explains why she looks so surprised. In my own constituency of Bournemouth East, we are seeing Bournemouth Airport as one of 2 major airports in the UK alongside Cardiff, being a place where goods made by forced labour, particularly in China, are coming into our country. And we need to get a grip on that. Yeah. I want to commend the reporting of the Bournemouth Daily Echo, which has shone a light on this, and I want to commend the work of my colleagues in this House and the other place in trying to expose this horrible, horrible activity. We need to stop the infection of goods with slavery coming into our country, and I've been calling on the government to do more with that. The government, in coming into office 9 months ago, have done a fantastic amount of good work. I mentioned earlier the reforms to the renters sector, the reforms to employment rights, the investment in our public services, which will prop up vulnerable young lives to reduce vulnerability to enslavement. But I also commend the commitment to cuckooing as a specific offence, our commitment to introducing a standalone offence of child exploitation, the creation of the Fair Work Agency through the Employment Rights Bill, the eradication of the backlog of decisions which will come in time as we have hired 200 additional Home Office staff to process modern slavery cases, and ensuring that the portfolio for modern slavery is under the Minister for Safeguarding and Violence Against Women and Girls, a thing I'm particularly pleased about. And I want to close, if I may, just by talking about a really important contributor to the fight against modern slavery, the cooperative movement. And I want to do that, if I may, just by slightly going back in time. In 1864, Manchester was Cottonopolis. It was the biggest industrial city of the world based on cotton. 90% of the UK's cotton came from the Confederacy. At that time, there was obviously the Civil War that was happening. It was also in 1864 the case that the Lancashire famine was happening. People were dying on the streets of Manchester. But those weavers wrote to Abraham Lincoln to say that they were on his side, that they supported his fight against slavery at a time when they were working 1 or 2 working day weeks. That's why in Manchester, by John Dalton Library, there's a square called Lincoln Square with a statue of Abraham Lincoln, because in 1864 he wrote back to the people of Manchester and he thanked them for their heroism unknown in any age and in any country. Now, people in Manchester in 1864 bonded together to fight slavery despite the cost of their own lives. This country has been a compassionate and kind country, working hard within our communities and at a governmental and parliamentary level to tackle modern slavery. But we are now at an inflection point. As we've heard from colleagues, the world is more unstable, the risks of modern slavery are greater, and we need to be tackling this with UK leadership on the world stage. So I want to close just by thanking Baroness May, who 10 years ago did so much to lead the way on this matter, and I want to commend the work of the government, who I know is committed to leading the world on this matter too. Thank you.
Which brings us to the front bench contributions. Liberal Democrat spokesperson Josh Babarinde.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Right Honourable Member for Staffordshire Moorlands for securing this debate and all the work that she did in government to give us a Modern Slavery Act to commemorate and mark and build on today. And it means a lot to contribute towards this debate on what is a landmark piece of legislation that affirmed our country's commitment to eradicating this cruel and insidious crime. Slavery is one of the greatest affronts to the fundamental British principle of individual liberty, the principle that no human being should be enslaved. And it is sad that we have to have a debate today to remind ourselves of things like that. Sad that some of my ancestors, my Nigerian ancestors, might have thought that debates about the nature and extent of slavery might never have to happen again. Sad that we are having them in the modern day. And sad that at least 120,000 people in the UK, as we've discussed, are victims and survivors of modern slavery. And it's hopeful that Parliament committed via this Act and in many other ways to confronting the shocking reality that slavery hadn't been consigned to the history books after all. It's hopeful that Parliament acknowledged its moral duty to protect those who are among the most vulnerable in our society, who are coerced, who are manipulated, who are abused in conditions that no human should ever endure. Hopeful that Parliament set out clear legal definitions, strengthened law enforcement capabilities and demanded corporate supply chain transparency and action. And hopeful that since the Act's passage, many victims and survivors have been identified, have been supported, and have been supported by greater coordination between law enforcement agencies, NGOs, local authorities, the voluntary sector, and more. And it's hopeful that we have seen milestone convictions of traffickers and that more survivors have been given a voice and a chance to rebuild their lives with dignity and with hope. And we should be so proud of all of those who have played a role in that hope. Proud of politicians like the Right Honourable Member and like the Baroness May and many others. Proud of statutory authorities like Sussex Police in my patch and our local authorities, and of course equivalents across the country for the role that they play in combating modern slavery. We should be proud of those civil servants who work right across government behind the scenes to make Britain a leader in the fight against modern slavery. And there is one of those civil servants who I know particularly well, who I won't embarrass or compromise by naming, but who I know is watching. And I hope that the likes of her know that her backstage efforts are just as critical as the work done by those who are front and centre. I'm also proud of our voluntary sector for their very direct role in helping victims and survivors of modern slavery to rebuild their lives with dignity and hope too. In particular, I'd like to pay tribute to Eastbourne's Bramber Bakehouse, led by the amazing Lucy Butt, which uses the medium of baking to empower women survivors of modern slavery to rebuild their confidence, develop their skills, and take a step towards a more fulfilling future. But most importantly, I would like to pay tribute to the resilience of those victims and survivors of modern slavery who the Modern Slavery Act is fighting for, and who all of us who are gathered here in this chamber, but I know many others who can't be here, are committed to fighting for today. And I'm particularly inspired to read about Aisha. It's not her real name, but that is somebody who Lucy and her team at Bramber Bakehouse have supported. And Aisha is a survivor of human trafficking, and she subsequently lived in a safe house. And she said of that time, "Every day you just wait in the safe house. Days turn into months, you can't work, and it's really isolating. I felt really sad and I had no purpose." But when Bramber Bakehouse offered her a place on their programme alongside other women survivors, Aisha, wanting to see the best in this, was deeply suspicious about why anybody would pay for her to get on a train and go and bake. But her support worker encouraged her to. She gave it a go. She said that getting on the train felt like a big deal. I had to get ready, I had to be on time, I had my ticket. I suddenly felt independent and that I was getting away from it all. I'd never baked before, but I realised that I could do this. I could actually make something that looked and tasted amazing. It was therapy without therapy. And throughout the programme, Aisha spent time identifying her future goals, practising interviews, and in particular remembers discussing how to see her weaknesses as strengths. And several years on, I'm delighted to say that Aisha has secured paid employment. She's working in a profession that she enjoys. And on the side, she supports campaigning against modern slavery, giving a survivor's perspective and campaigning for change. And I'm sure the whole House will join me in paying tribute to Aisha and everyone whose stories Aisha represents. So we owe it to the likes of her, however, to redouble our ambition, a decade on from the passing of the Act, to root out modern slavery and ask ourselves, is what we are doing now enough? And based on what every single honourable and right honourable member has said in this debate so far, we know in our heart of hearts that the answer to the question is no. What we're doing now is not enough, and we must do more. In particular, Liberal Democrats believe that we must reverse the challenges to modern slavery protections that were represented by the Illegal Migration Act that I know the government is making progress on, and ensure that all legislation is compatible with the UK's international law obligations, including the Council of Europe Convention on Action Against Trafficking in Human Beings. We must create more safe and legal routes to sanctuary in the UK, taking the power out of the hands of the people smugglers who go on to, as the Right Honourable Member said, force so many of those who survive the dangerous crossings into lives of servitude. We must ensure that county lines exploitation is properly recognised as a form of modern slavery. Before coming to this House, I dedicated my career to supporting young people who were involved in gangs and crime. Saw this kind of stuff up close, but according to Unseen, 1 in 5 people have never heard of county lines exploitation, compared to only 2% of Corsica.
Tom Hayes.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. He's making a really important point there about county lines. Last week I visited Vita Nova in Boscombe to see a performance about county lines, which they've been taking into schools in order to raise awareness of children about the risks and what it looks like. Does he agree with me that we could be rolling out more education about what county lines is to schools so that schools and children are better prepared to resist it?
Josh Babarinde.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's critical that we educate not just children about what risk factors and what things to look out for, but also folks who are spending time supporting those children, whether it's parents, guardians, carers, whether it's teachers, and whether it is others, to better identify this and then be able to tackle it before it escalates into something that is completely irreversible. What we must also do is ensure that our rightful pursuit of a low-carbon economy is not done on the backs of the slave labour of the Uyghurs. And this call echoes the very powerful call of my constituent, Dorrit Oliver Wolfe, who survived the Holocaust. She has written to the Prime Minister talking about how her father was sent to Siberia for slave labour and never returned. Dorrit has since committed to spending her time saying never again, and we must fight to ensure that that is the case, and this debate will help to get us there.
So, Katie Lamb.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On Tuesday, the 8th of July 2014, the then Home Secretary, later Prime Minister, and now the Right Honourable Baroness May, stood at that dispatch box to present the Modern Slavery Bill, as it was then, for its second reading. She spoke powerfully of those tricked and coerced into a horrendous life of servitude and abuse. Women forced into prostitution, raped repeatedly and denied their liberty. Children groomed and sexually exploited for profit. Vulnerable men conned into brutal and inhumane work in fields, in factories and on fishing vessels. People forced into a life of crime. She talked of sexual violence, beatings, humiliation, hunger and mental torture. As the Right Honourable Baroness May rightly said that day, modern slavery is an affront not just to those it affects, but to the collective human dignity of all of us. The way some people treat and exploit their fellow human beings is sadly nothing short of disgusting, and such behaviour has no place in Britain. But those were not just words. She acted too, bringing forward this legislation, the first of its kind in Europe, which received royal assent a decade and a day ago today. I would like to congratulate and thank my right honourable friend, the member for Staffordshire Moorlands, for securing this debate today. She has a long and proud history of campaigning on this issue. Indeed, she was the Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State in the Home Office for preventing abuse, exploitation and crime at the time of the passage of this bill, and has done considerable work, including with the Commonwealth Parliamentary Authority, on stamping out this revolting practice. Now, of course, she continues to put her expertise and dedication to protecting the vulnerable to excellent use as Chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee. She makes some powerful points about the need to keep this legislation world-leading, as she has done repeatedly in this House and elsewhere. She speaks, for example, of orphanage trafficking and the work that has been done in Australia to tackle it. It is horrifying that an estimated 80% of children living in the world's orphanages have at least one living parent, but have been separated from their families, sometimes forcibly, to be exploited and used to raise money for corrupt orphanage directors. I imagine the Minister, who is also known for her commitment to the victims of these sorts of appalling crimes, will want to work with her to ensure our laws protect the vulnerable as well as they possibly can. I would like to pay tribute to the Right Honourable Baroness May, to my Right Honourable friend, the Member for Staffordshire Moorlands, and to former members of this House who campaigned on this issue, including but not limited to Anthony Steen, the now Baron Randall, and the late Frank Field. And I would like to thank everyone who has contributed to the debate we have had here today. The Honourable Member for East Renfrewshire spoke authoritatively and movingly about the deeply upsetting plight of the Uyghur people and the role slavery shamefully plays in that. I am happy to take this opportunity to reassure him that he is neither tired nor showing his age, but the points he makes about the need to keep our laws up to date are well made. The Honourable Member for Wimbledon does great credit to the proud history of his constituency in fighting the evil of slavery. He is right to speak of the complexities of the British state and the challenges this poses in tackling modern slavery. The Honourable Member for Worcester is also right to mention in the same vein the need for coordination across government and the role local authority empowerment and responsibility can play in that. The Honourable Member for North Herefordshire, who I hope will not mind if I take a moment now to admire her jacket, asked about decision reviews and visa flexibility. She and I think, have somewhat different views on those subjects, but I'm sure the Minister will address her questions. The Honourable Member for Congleton spoke of the shocking role the vile drugs trade can have in trapping our young people into cycles of vicious exploitation, and the horrors of enforced prostitution, a form of institutionalised rape. The Honourable Member for Edinburgh East and Musselburgh was very gracious in his acknowledgement of the hard work of my Right Honourable friend, the Member for Staffordshire Moorlands, and the previous government, and should be proud of the work he has done to prevent human, including child, trafficking. Finally, the Honourable Member for Bournemouth East touched on several of the points we have heard this afternoon, including the exploitation of young boys, and rightly reminded us again of our long history of kindness as a country. And we must, as we reflect on the Modern Slavery Act and its impact, ensure that that national compassion and generosity is not exploited by the cynical and the sinister. As my Right Honourable friend, the Member for Croydon South, has said, the Modern Slavery Act's noble intentions are sometimes sadly abused by foreign criminals who rely on suspect claims under this Act to avoid deportation. My Right Honourable friend has talked of cases he witnessed at the Home Office of immigration lawyers submitting, and I quote, copy and paste claims for different clients, with no attempts made to change the details, and discussed how in many instances very little proof is needed, allowing illegal migrants and foreign criminals to offer plausible-sounding stories in lieu of real evidence. This applies even in cases where migrants have previously explicitly denied that they were victims of modern slavery. The number of modern slavery claims has gone from around 3,000 in 2015 to over 19,000 in 2025, of whom 3/4 are not UK citizens. The most frequent referral route for modern slavery claims is now through the immigration system, and by the end of 2022, of those migrants who arrived illegally in the UK by small boat and were subsequently detained for return, somewhere between 1/2 and 3/4 each year were claiming to be victims of modern slavery. In 2023, it was reported that 1,068 Albanian convicts living in Britain were awaiting deportation, amongst them sexual predators, violent thugs and drug dealers. Of this group, nearly a third, 345, actively claimed to be modern slaves, hoping to escape removal. The abuse of the Modern Slavery Act, where it does happen, is not just a perversion of the Act's noble intentions, but also an insult to this country's compassion and a deplorable diversion of vital resources from real victims. We must set an appropriate threshold for supporting evidence to ensure the system rightly prioritises the true victims rather than struggling under the weight of claims designed to frustrate immigration proceedings. Many of the claims made under the Modern Slavery Act are genuine pleas for help from those in the most frightening and shocking situations of abuse. We must ensure the Act is kept up to date to protect them.
Minister, Jess Phillips.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I will begin by congratulating, and I shall call her this now, my right honourable friend for Staffordshire Moorlands for securing this debate. I don't wish anyone to think that she's walked the floor. She's just my friend for securing this debate on this topic, and it is, as has been commented, very close to my heart as it is to hers. Her passion and insight came through very, very clearly as she spoke, and I am grateful to her and everybody who has contributed. Like the Right Honourable Lady, I have a long-standing interest in these issues, and they have been a feature of my work since before I came to this House, and in fact I spent many hours in meetings in Marsham Street as somebody running one of the support services in preparation for the bill. So it is truly something to be celebrated. When the Modern Slavery Act was passed, it was a hugely significant step, and I commend the Right Honourable Lady for her role in making that happen, alongside the then Home Secretary, now Baroness May of Maidenhead, as well as all of the parliamentarians who've been mentioned today. I'm not a politician who generally gets carried away about legislation. It is outcomes that I care about rather than words written on a page. But this really was a landmark moment, as much for the message it sent about our determination to fight modern slavery and exploitation at home and abroad, as for the measures that it also introduced. The 10th anniversary provides us with an opportunity to reflect on the progress we have made and the significant challenges that remain. The UK was once at the forefront of the fight against modern slavery, and I would very much like to see us in that role again. Before I come on to how we make that happen, many people have talked about victims within their own constituencies here today, and also some of the misconceptions that people think about victims of modern slavery. And just to tell a story, I, like many people do, support many victims of modern slavery in my own constituency, and I was taking my son out to an event where I'd invited a young woman who'd been a victim of sexual exploitation and modern slavery to come along with us to this particular event because she was having a particularly down time. And when I warned my son, I said, oh, you know, she's a victim of modern slavery and human trafficking, so just to warn you. And when she got in the car, after a full day with her, he said to me, but Mum, I didn't understand. She was British. I didn't think you could be a victim of modern slavery if you were British. And there are many misconceptions about who is using our service, and we have to make sure that we are making sure that it is right for all of them. We know that victims are waiting too long for conclusive grounds decisions, and we know how detrimental this is to their well-being and recovery. And that is why I have made clearing the decision backlog a personal priority. Our new staff started arriving in December, and I gave them the task of eradicating the backlog by December 2026. In a few short months, we have hired over 100 new staff, and as of last month, the backlog is now half the size it was at its worst in 2022. That is what real effort looks like. Not endless talking, not empty commitments, not apathy, but concrete, focused action to deliver results for victims and survivors with compassion and care. We have taken meaningful steps to decouple the issue of immigration and modern slavery, and I'm pleased that modern slavery has returned to my portfolio as the Safeguarding Minister. I can also confirm that the Border Security, Asylum and Immigration Bill would repeal the modern slavery provisions linked to the duty to remove in the Illegal Migration Act of 2023, and this would ensure that there is no blanket ban on irregular migrants seeking modern slavery protections, to the point that was made by the Shadow Minister. That does in no means mean that anybody can just claim to be a victim of modern slavery. For a start off, the system we have in our country for modern slavery, people cannot refer themselves. It is only Border Force, local authorities, the Salvation Army and the police that can refer, and it is up to those agencies to make sure those referrals are done appropriately. Our manifesto recognised the need to strengthen the response to serious exploitation, and the new offence of child criminal exploitation has been included in the Crime and Policing Bill alongside preventative orders to provide greater protection to children who are being exploited by criminals. We will also strengthen and streamline domestic labour market enforcement through the creation of the Fair Work Agency, which will provide a more cohesive response. And I hear some of the concerns about the GLAA moving into that. And I suppose all I can say to members at the moment is that by no means does the creation of the Fair Work Agency mean that my responsibility as the Minister in charge of modern slavery is removed from any of the scrutiny of what happens in the Fair Work Agency? She said here. I thought she wanted me to give way, but I mean, just make more work for me, but just in somebody else's government department. But I understand the concerns about that. The Fair Work Agency will have greater powers and greater resource, actually, in order to do some of the work that so many people have talked about today. And on Monday, I launched a new Transparency in Supply Chain statutory guidance. This guidance provides practical and comprehensive advice for businesses so that they can go further and faster in their fight against modern slavery. And we are collaborating with our international partners too, and I recently travelled to Romania to strengthen our joint approach to tackling these awful crimes. To the member for Congleton, while I was there, I met a woman who had been trafficked to my constituency via Paris and London from Romania into prostitution. And so I very much would like to lend my voice to the call for the member of Congleton about I wish people would just stop sleeping with prostitutes because that is an exploitation of those women. And the stories those women in Romania told me were absolutely harrowing. We are working on a joint action plan with Vietnam also, and I will be able to share more information on that in due course. These are all important steps that we have tried to take within being in office within 8 months. And I understand that there is so much more to do. To support this, we have developed the Modern Slavery Action Plan in collaboration with the NGO sector and the criminal justice partners. The plan sets out the first steps of our ambitious vision to tackle modern slavery at its root and to reform the whole system. It reinforces our commitment to working across government and civil society, businesses and international partners to prevent exploitation, protect victims and pursue those who are responsible for these heinous crimes. We will soon, to answer the question about whether the NRM is stuck, not working, needs reform, we will soon be launching a public consultation on how the government can improve the process of identifying victims of modern slavery. And if I do nothing else, the reform of the NRM, I think, is something that I feel fairly certain that I can commit to. It is not working. The system does not work. To answer some of the questions that have been asked throughout this debate, I think it's to the Honourable Lady, NRM reform, yes, please, let's take part in the consultation. No doubt her committee will do some of that. The protection for victims being a two-tier system that she has talked about is an absolute reality that I recognise, have seen directly from my own work. The thing that has been mentioned by more honourable members than anything else is the transparency in supply chains and the need to go further. As I have said, that we are doing whatever we can in lieu of new legislation, in the meantime, in lieu of new legislation, to ensure that we are making the systems that we have in place better and the reporting of that to be better and more transparent. However, I hear the calls very clearly, like the Right Honourable Lady, have been waiting for a piece of modern slavery legislation that had been promised in every speech, king or queen, to this House that has yet to come. And so there is nothing, I think, that I would say that is currently off the table for members of this House to work with the government on with regard to that, with a special mention to the Uyghur Muslims who have been mentioned again and again in this House, and the real need for us to very robustly especially while we see other countries advancing forward in this space, to not allow our country to become a place of flooded area where things that can happen here can't happen, whether that's in the European Union or with our partners in the US. Advancing in this particular space. The member for East Renfrewshire, he is honourable and looking great. It seems like we all have to say that. He and other members have mentioned Hope for Justice. Hope for Justice are very much part of the core group of those we take advice from within the department, and Ewan himself I speak to regularly. I have met with the victim navigators that many people referred to and saw the absolute value of them myself. And many people also have mentioned the devolved decision making. I am completely convinced as a policy maker that the devolved decision making in the cases of children is something that we should be seeking to expand. It is a far more preferable situation. To the member for North Herefordshire, with regard to the review panel, she did then go on to cite that 70% of decisions turned down decisions, not 70% of decisions, are overturned, which does somewhat suggest that there isn't a need for a review, that review system already overturns them. I'm not without sympathy on the issue of the review panel. It is not something that has been particularly raised with me by the sector experts who I work with in concert, but I will take that away. As for temporary workers for domestic visas, I'll just say this first. I am very much alive to the issue of domestic worker visas and how domestic workers have been forced through the NRM potentially unfairly and incorrectly, and I am alive to that. I am also quite alive to the idea that we have a visa system in our country that allows incredibly rich people to bring domestic workers with them. I've got to say, I cook my own dinner and I've got a busy job. I have to say, I think that the whole system of domestic worker servitude is something that, as a feminist, I take a keen eye on. So I think that I have mainly answered all of the questions that were asked of me. There is huge. What pleases me is that, like 10 years ago, there is still huge enthusiasm in this place to push this forward, and that will only ever be rivalled by enthusiasm in the other place. And I'm glad I'm not the minister who's standing up and talking about this exact debate in there tomorrow, because they are a fierce force, and I expect progress to be made on this very issue, and I look forward to working with everybody who was here today on all of the issues. I hope that people feel we are open to suggestions and working together, as I think was the case when we got there in the first place.
And Bradley to wind up.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm going to start by referring to my entry in the Register of Members' Interest, which I failed to at the beginning of my other speech, and I'm very worried that I may have just talked about things that I have an interest in without referring to it, so I have done that now. I also want to pay tribute to you, Madam Deputy Speaker, because Madam Deputy Speaker was a member of the Bill Committee, and therefore was an integral part of delivering this legislation. So we were there together going through this. It's been a fantastic debate. I want to thank everybody who's taken part, and I will very briefly try and mention all of you. The Honourable Member for East Renfrewshire, things of beauty are many and varied, but the commitment that he has to the cause of the Uyghurs cannot be doubted, and I look forward to working with him on this matter. The honourable gentleman from Wimbledon, who is a very active member of the Home Affairs Select Committee, spoke very well about his previous constituent, Wilberforce, but also he mentioned the resources for the Independent Anti-Slavery Commissioner, and I again pay tribute to all those who've held the role, Ellen Lyons, who is there now, but Kevin Hyland and Dame Sarah Thornton, who've done amazing work. The honourable gentleman from Worcester, who's also an active member of the APPG, spoke so movingly about the human reaction and how this is important we can't take the emotion out of this. And the honourable lady from North Herefordshire, her points about immigration status are so important. Immigration status is such a vulnerability, and we do need to be careful. And if the Minister wants to get rid of overseas domestic workers' visas, she has an advocate in me. My neighbour, the honourable lady from Congleton, we share very many of the issues. We have a border, and those criminals are crossing that border, and they're between the two of us, and we do need to work together. And she's also an active member of the all-party group. And the honourable gentleman from Edinburgh East and Musselburgh, another active and excellent member of the Home Affairs Select Committee. He really does know what he's talking about, and I want to talk to him about the independent child trafficking advocates, because that's something we want to see rolled out everywhere. And the final backbench contribution was from the honourable member from Bournemouth East, and he talked about his great experience, and it's wonderful how much experience we have in this House. I want to thank everybody for taking part. The voices of the victims are the things that have come through in today's debate, and we must never ever forget that, and I want to work cross-party, as we always have on this issue, to keep delivering for those victims, because we owe it to them. Thank you.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.